Hello, everyone. Today is January 19th, 2021, and welcome to the OSU Specialty Crops Team in Ohio Controlled Environment Agriculture Center Virtual High Tunnel School. The school is a live weekly session and discussion for current and potential high tunnel users. Classes are held via Zoom at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11:30 a.m. Central Time every Tuesday from January 12th through February 16th. Today, there's a total of 6 sessions, and today is number 2. Thank you for joining us as we recognize there's lots of competition for your time. So we appreciate your sharing some of your time with us. I'm Sabrina Schirtzinger, an agricultural and natural resource educator for Knox County with Ohio State University Extension, and I'll serve as your host and moderator for today's session. We will welcome and hear from our presenters soon. However, before getting into the subject matter, we must cover a bit of background to help you get the most from joining us. So first, please note that you currently cannot be heard or seen. Your audio and video transmissions are currently blocked, and I'm currently the only one that can be seen and heard. Second, your video will remain off throughout the class, but you have 2 options for communicating with us throughout today. The first way is to use the chat feature, and this is located at the bottom of your screen window, and then this will open a box allowing you to type in a question or a comment that you might have with everybody. And then it can be directed towards everybody, or you can select whoever you would like to talk to. The second way to communicate with others is by audio. To use that option, you wait until the Q&A portion of the session, then click raise your hand at the bottom of your window, and then I will see that you've raised your hand, and if possible, I'll ask you to unmute to talk to us. Please note that placing a question in the chat box is very effective. If the question's not answered today, it'll be addressed after class. All registrants will receive a follow-up email containing responses to questions and comments that are placed in the chat box. That covers our communication during the session, so let's get started. Today, we will cover site preparation, installation, and early stages of success and challenges. And we have 2 guests who are going to talk to us about these topics. So joining us today are Matt Kleinhenz, professor with horticulture and crop science at OARDC, and Brad Bergefurd, educator for agriculture and natural resources with OSU South Centers. Brad will speak on site preparation, installation, and Matt will present on early stages of success and challenges that you might face with your systems. So Brad, the floor is yours for site preparation.
All righty. Well, thanks a lot, Sabrina, and pleasure to be with you all today. Can't wait for the day we can all get back together face to face, but in the meantime, we can hopefully get everybody geared up. It's a beautiful sunny day down here in Southern Ohio, and we were out in our strawberry tunnel that we have at Piketon this morning, and the strawberry crop is looking good, even though we've put it away to bed for the winter. It's looking good. Everything's still green, and it was a little warm in there this morning. So the spring is definitely coming, but I have about a 4-hour class that I'm going to share with you that we're going to get done in 15 minutes. So as you would know, we're definitely not going to be able to get in depth on site prep and basic installation. In my lifetime, I have 5 tunnels that I've put up 8 times. I don't know if you got that. I have 5 tunnels I've put up 8 times. And those 3 other times were because I did not do my site prep and basic installation right. So hopefully in this quick 15 minutes of basic site prep and installation, I can hopefully share some of my experiences and ward off some major headaches that you could experience as you're thinking about site prepping and getting your high tunnel installed. Oops, went too far. But before high tunnels were even high tunnels, back in '96, for those of you that have been at our South Centers at Piketon, we actually had this harebrained idea, why can't we put these strawberries into a greenhouse like you see here and get these strawberries blooming a little bit earlier and maybe get an earlier market. So that was the first thing that we did. This was, I don't know, I guess this might have been the first quote high tunnel in the state of Ohio back in 96. We're part of OHCEAC, and OHCEAC had an old nursery code frame. It was destined to the scrapyard. So we got wind of it, went up with the gooseneck trailer in the big truck and loaded up all these pieces that look like Swiss cheese because they've been taken up, put down with self-tapping screws numerous times. But we brought it back to Piketon, and this is our first movable greenhouse high tunnel that I'm aware of in the state. I know farmers have been doing this a lot longer, but we decided to try to do it at Piketon. So this is the very first experience I had building a high tunnel, and there was no manuals, no nothing. We just had this pile of scrap on the trailer and we had to turn it into a high tunnel. So thanks to our farm crew and our farm manager, we put our brains together and came up with this, and it worked, and we did get earlier strawberries. When it comes to basic greenhouse or tunnel components, these are your basics. You got your hip, or your hoop, or your rib, or your arch, or your bow. You might hear those terms all used that they all reference the same thing. It's the big thing that gives that tunnel its structure and its shape. Then we have purlins or ridge poles. Again, the terminology might be different, but you might hear some folks calling things different. But purlins are just what's running the length of the tunnel and holding the thing together. So your purlins attached to your ribs or your hoops, and that is what tightens and sturdies the entire structure up. Then that's the basic structure. And then you have your end walls. So wherever on each end of your tunnel, you're gonna have some type of an end wall. That can be a poly, it could be plexi, it can be wooden, it can be an overhead door. Lots of ways to do end walls. And again, we're not gonna get all these details today, but at least you'll have a basic idea what a high tunnel is. Then we have our hip boards, which don't quite come to your hip, but when you stand next to a high tunnel, it'll be what's just about at your waist height or a little bit higher. Ours are always higher because we want that, we usually have roll up sides or drop down curtains. So we want our hip boards as high as we can get them to roll that sidewall up as high as we can to help facilitate air movement. But again, usually made out of 4x6s or 2x4s, just depend on what you're going to be using that hip board for. And then we got our sidewalls, which helps. That's below the hip board, but above the baseboard. Again, those can be panels, they can be poly, they can be the curtains like we use in livestock barns or in poultry barns. That's where your sidewall will be. And most of the time we encourage to have those move up or down. Since these tunnels are passively cooled, we need to have some type of opening to get that air moving through there. And then the bottom that ties everything all together, all your ground stakes, is a baseboard. And again, that's usually a treated 4x6. Those that have a lot of money can make them out of that new poly board that they make. And then that'll vary too. Like Dr. Kleinhenz has a lot of movable tunnels. So if you see some of his pictures, he'll have wheels that are secured to that baseboard and so forth, just to move that tunnel. And some are on other rails. But basically, this is the basic components of a high tunnel. But even before all of that, selecting the site is the most important key step. If you missed this basic, easy thing, you are going to be paying lots of money in the long run. Look at this picture here. This is one of my farmers. I think this one's down around the Rainsboro area. But see how that high tunnel is sitting up higher than the rest of the terrain? That's where we want these high tunnels. We definitely don't want them at the bottom, or if we have poorly drained soils like we have in Southern Ohio, we really don't want them level with the ground, the surrounding terrain and ground, because we don't want to turn that tunnel into a fishbowl. And believe me, I've seen them get turned into a fishbowl. If that tunnel, and we have frozen soil with lots of rain, and that tunnel sheds all that water from a rainfall event, and it happens to be just a little bit below the surrounding terrain, guess where all that water is going to go? It's going to go into the tunnel. And so if that happens, you've lost your crop, and then you probably have to tear it all back down, re-excavate it up. So number one, go out with a front end loader or an excavator or something and build up that terrain, that base pad that you're going to put that tunnel on. Build that up higher than the rest of the surrounding area, because you do not want to turn that high tunnel into a very expensive fishbowl. And then you don't really want to do this. Again, this guy's already setting his ground stakes, and he's still pulling this, pulling the brush and the weeds, and he's trying to prep the ground. These things aren't cheap, folks. Even if you do get some cost share from a USDA program, it costs money just in the labor, whether it's your labor or not, to put these things up. And you want to put them on your best site, your best well-drained site, your best site that has had the soils built up. If you're going to be using a soil culture, the soils have already been amended. They've already built up. You got the weeds under control. You got the perennial and the annual weeds, because we don't have herbicides, folks, that can be used in these tunnels. So do you think this guy's going to have himself some weed issues? I think he's going to. So we definitely don't want to do that. And then look at the surrounding. He's got trees and woods. Is that going to do the best to facilitate his air movement in that high tunnel? Heck no, there's trees all around it. So again, a very bad chosen site. Not only it wasn't prepped accordingly, but it's got trees all around it. And it's not going to be passively cooled. It's going to be a stagnant mess, and he's going to probably have problems if he did go forward with this. Another thing we need to think about is shading and spacing. This can be from existing structures, from trees, from other greenhouses or tunnels. A good rule of thumb, as tall as that greenhouse is, if it's a 12-foot tall tunnel, most of these tunnels are 12 foot at the peak, the minimum you want to space that is 24 feet away. That's from shading. Now we also, especially up in the northern Ohio area, like in Geauga County and Eric Draper's County up there, who's the ag educator up there, you know, they're getting a snow event today, major snow event from the lake effect snow. Where's all that snow going to go if you get 8, 10, 12, 14 inches? It's going to pile and slide off the greenhouses, hopefully. we want to make sure that happens. And then if the snow starts to pile up in the middle, we got to have some room there. If those two tunnels you see in this picture were very close together, and you get 8, 10, 12 inches snowfall events piled up over 4 events, you're going to have so much snow between these tunnels that the sidewalls will collapse. So you definitely want to give yourself plenty of room for spacing and shading, not only for shading effects, but for snow load events. And again, drainage is very important. Not only do you want to raise the elevation where that pad's going to be for that tunnel, but you want to have as much drainage tile, periphery tile all around the tunnel. If you can get that into a field tile, into a grass waterway, you can't have enough drainage in these tunnels. I was talking how much rain comes off of these tunnels. So, you know, if we have a 1-inch rainfall event coming off of a 30 by 96 foot tall tunnel, all the rain that's being shedded by that tunnel is 1,728 gallons of water. That's a lot of water. And then especially if we have frozen ground, we need to get that water away from the tunnel. We do not want that to come in. And again, folks, I've heard too many horror stories of poor people put these things up and then the thing gets flooded from a heavy rainfall event. Lots of different design options. You know, I have farmers that buy them. I have a manufacturer, a farmer that actually manufactures and bends metal that makes them. I've had folks use wood out of their lumber out of their woods that they've used. So there's lots of different designs, and you probably want to design these for the type of climate you have. We want a more peaked vertical if we're in an area like here in Ohio, and especially northern Ohio, to allow that snow to shed off. Where a Quonset, you could get under these heavy snow events, a lot of ice and snow could build up at the peak. So if you're going to be in a heavy snowfall area, you want to have a little more peak vertical to that. You'll have to determine the width and size, the length yourself. That's part of your production plans. You know, if you can make these things bigger, most of my farmers are going with 30 to 32 width by 120 feet long. And Matt and I have had some of you even participated in some of our tours. We've had one of my farmers has a ton of the size of a football field. So it just depends on your production scenario and what you want. But they can be as small or as big as you want, but size it that you're going to need more room. it seems like Matt and I have used this before. Tunnels breed more tunnels. It just never fails. So you build one, it's not big enough. You need another one. So build that original one, because once you get beyond that 30 foot width and 96 feet long, it really doesn't cost too much more to add on another 5 or 10 feet length and another 2 or 3 feet on the width. So just determine whatever size you want. You'll have to think about your stake or your post or your bow spacings. Again, if you're in a heavy snowfall area, you'll want those bows to be closer together. Here in Southern Ohio, a lot of the ones that I've put up, we've went up to 5 and 6 foot bow spacings, because we don't get near the snow load that you all do up in Northern Ohio and some of these heavy snow areas. So if you're in a heavy snow or ice area, bows can be spaced a little closer together. If you're getting down into a Southern Ohio or Tennessee, or even down into some of the states that have no snow load events, you can cheapen your cost up a little bit by spreading those bows out a little bit. There's different heights. Heights are good depending on the crops you want. If you want to do vertical growing tomatoes or strawberries, you'd probably want a 12-foot tall tunnel like the one on the left. If you're just going to grow low tunnel type crops, lettuces and some of the lower crops, you may want to go the shorter tunnel like on the right, because just remember, the higher these are, that's more heat that you're going to, if you do decide to heat them, that's more space that you're going to have to heat. But again, that's a decision you will make determining on your crop mix and what types of crops you're going to be growing in those. Think about the interior considerations. We've been on lots of tours and I have lots of farmers that are using a tunnel within a tunnel, especially in these early season plantings, to try to keep that heat down closer to the crop. So just keep that in mind as you're designing your tunnel. We're going to start flying through these. These are just some of the tents that some of the growers are using. If you want to get a tractor in there, you want to have this big enough to get that tractor in there. So you have to have them end walls opened up, and then you have to have your sidewalls taller. Because if you went with a tunnel that had a more of a curved sidewall closer to the bottom, your tractor tires are going to hit it. So just remember, if you're going to get a tractor in there, the higher the sidewall, the better if you're going to use tractors. Then we're just going to go over real quick here on the basics of laying this thing out. You want to check your elevation and drainage. And believe me, if you've been on some of my tours I have of my farmers here in Southern Ohio, you see we're building these things on hills. So that's another whole thing, but they can be built on a hill, really. Hills are pretty good. If you put your heat at the bottom end, heat moves up and the heat goes to the top of the hill. And some of you have been on some of my tours. You know that we have some tunnels built. The best, though, is on a flat pad with good drainage and as flat an elevation as we can get. Getting that thing square, if anybody's ever built a barn or anything, a house, this is the same. You just use the Pythagorean theorem. Your A squared plus your B squared equals C squared. So you'll just check that C of both of the sides, the A and the B, your width and your length, and try to lay it out the best you can. But then this is how you'll do your final adjustments, is by A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Just your basic, sixth, seventh grade math. Another key that we've thought that we've came up with over the years of building these things, whoever is looking at that tape, have that same person be checking the tape. It's really a weird thing, but we all have different eyes. And when we look at a tape, we can look at that thing different. At least I do. But just have the same person, the same set of eyes checking that tape when you're trying to square your tunnel up. Then we go ahead and how tall you're going to put these ground stakes in. You want to go a little bit deeper on some sandier soil. You can go a little bit shallower on some clay soil. But anyway, lay all the ground stakes out, put the depth that you're going to pound them to with a Sharpie, and that's what you'll do. You'll just pound all those ground stakes in. That's on a flat surface. If you're going to be going on some elevations like we are, you'll have to compensate that depth for that. Easy to buy one of these levels that you secure to each of the ground stakes to make sure you're pounding your post in nice and level and straight, because after you've done about 70 of these posts, pounding them with a fence post pounder, you can get off one side or the other a little bit. At least I do. And then just go ahead and use lots of string it out when you're laying down your post. Have your tape laying down there as well. And if you're going to put them at 4, 5, 6 foot bow spacings, this is where you go ahead and drop that pole at that ground stake at each of those marks. If you're going to assemble those rafters, lay them on a flat surface. Too many people try to put them together out in the field where they're putting a tunnel. I get it. You don't want to drag these things clear across the field, but if you're putting them in your fields a little unlevel, the bow is going to be unlevel. So take your time, take them up to a nice flat driveway or a concrete pad, assemble your rafters there. Then they'll all be straight going into the tunnel. Then when we get the rafters up, just get lots of helpers and start sliding those rafters over top of those ground stakes after you've put them in. Going back on ground stakes, some of my folks in windier areas will actually concrete in every other ground stake. And then some of my folks up along Lake Erie that get a lot of winds, they'll concrete in every ground stake. That's not typical of a high tunnel because high tunnels are supposed to be not permanent structures, but sometimes we have to under these high wind events. Then once we get the bows up, then we go ahead and start adding our cross spacing, whether that's trusses or whatever. A lot of my farmers put trusses in them because they can actually hang the tomatoes off of the trusses and do other things off of those trusses. Just helps support that a lot better. And then you go ahead and attach your purlins. And again, you have to measure all those up as you're attaching the purlins to make sure you're putting them all on center. And then start building your ends, get the whole thing plumbed up. You leave it a little loose for a little bit, and then you go ahead and plumb up the entire structure, and then take your cordless drill and go ahead and tighten up all the bolts or nuts or whatever you're using to secure that structure. Then we go ahead and use our 4x6 baseboards to help hold the bottom all together. And again, that can either be polywood or treated lumber. And then go ahead and attach our hipboards. Then we go ahead and build our end walls, doors, put in vents, lots of vents. And I just remembered, I forgot to put a picture in here, but we just now installed roof vents in our big tunnel we have down at Piketon, and that is a lifesaver. They open up with the wax. When the wax heats up, the roof vent opens up. So definitely consider, and most of my farmers are now retrofitting their existing tunnels with these roof vents, but you just can't get enough ventilation through these things. Lots of different ways to attach your end walls. You can buy these fancy prefab metal end wall kits, or you can just make your own out of 2x4s. Just depends on your situation, what kind you're going to be using. Door options, you'll definitely need a door. So again, if you're going to use tractors, you want to have that door big enough to get the tractor in and out, and then you want to have a man door to get a walk in and out. Again, can't do enough on venting, just a simple vent like on the right. Just something that you can have a piece of wire there or a string that you open and shut that vent. You know how much on a hot day you can exhaust a lot of heat out of that tunnel with that peak vent. Then you got your Wirelock, your Lathe boards. However, most folks are using wiggle wire and Wirelock now to hold the poly down, but there's still a lot of folks use Lathe boards on there. And then you're ready to cover and skin. And no, don't get me wrong, but you're gonna need lots of buddies. Probably have to buy them lots of refreshments, whether that's Bud Light or Coca-Cola or whatever you give them to talk them in and convincing them to come in and help you. And another thing is a weight requirement. The bigger the people to help you pull that plastic down, the better off you're going to be. Because no matter what the weatherman says, and you get up in the morning, there's no wind at all. Hey, time to pull, you get everybody there. The minute you get this plastic opened up, the winds are going to start. And we've had one, a couple, me included, a couple of us big guys were on the one side of the poly trying to skin that tunnel, and a wind event picked us up, believe it or not. Guys like my size, as well as a couple others my size. So you definitely want some of your folks that are heavier, and lots of them. You can't have enough people. Once you pull that plastic, there's lots of ways to do it. What I usually use is just put tennis balls, wrap that poly in tennis balls, put the rope around the tennis ball, and then throw the ropes up over top of the tunnel and then skin the tunnel that way. But there's lots of different ways that folks have come up with skinning their tunnels. Then hopefully you got lots of folks with lots of good fingers, because once you've done 200 feet of wiggle wire, your fingers are really down to the bone. So be prepared, and the more hands you had to put that wiggle wire in, the better off you're going to be. Then you'll work on your roll-up side, you drop down curtains, whatever you're going to do for your sidewall ventilation. And then one thing you don't see a lot of folks using, but we have this batten strapping, and I'd say just maybe highly consider that, because when you get a windstorm, no matter how tight your poly is and no matter how good your inflation fan's working, that poly can start bouncing on you. If you can put this simple batten strapping over top of it, it just prevents that poly from billowing out and moving around, and makes it a lot easier on those sidewalls where you have your track and your strapping in place. So with that, feel free to give me a holler. A lot of you have been down to our high tunnel programs and our tours in the past. And again, hopefully someday we can have those in-person tours, but hopefully this gives you a background of siting that greenhouse, share with you some of my experiences, and we'll be covering a lot more of this as we go throughout the year. So with that, Sabrina.
Okay, Brad, we have a few questions. We have a few minutes for those. Okay, what is the best way to deal with weed issues in a high tunnel? Would you put down black fabric or plastic? Which is the best and more economical?
The best is to reduce that weed seed bank years before you're ever going to build a tunnel. That's the best thing. Control any, especially perennial weeds. And then, their annual weed seed banks. If you've had a bad cocklebur issue or a Jimson weed issue, a lot of our fields close to our farms have livestock pads. So you'll have heavy buildup of cocklebur and Jimson weed from many, many years of livestock feeding. You probably don't want to put that tunnel there. You just don't want to deal with it as much as you can, but you're going to. There's no doubt about it. There will be weeds no matter how good you've prepped that site in advance. So I didn't get to share any pictures today. Maybe we will here over the next few weeks, but I have farmers using both. They use the black plastic just in the row, and then they will straw in between. I have some of my farmers put black landscape fabric down on the entire floor of the tunnel, and then they have their holes already pre-cut for tomatoes or whatever with the row spacings. And then I have combinations of both, where folks use the black plastic in the row, and then they have strips of landscape fabric in between. So I would say both are good choices, and whatever just seems to work the best for you. If you're going to go the straw route, definitely use clean straw. Don't use straw that could potentially have more weed seeds in it, which a lot of our straw does these days. Plus, watch out. Haven't quite heard it in tunnels. Maybe some of the other folks have, but in the landscape industry, we've heard of some straw that they used some herbicides on and had some herbicide residual come in on that straw. So you could potentially have that happen, but I have never heard that in the tunnel industry, but I have heard some potential reports in the nursery industry.
Okay, here's another one. Are there any cost sharing programs available through the USDA, NRCS, or other programs for drainage assistance?
I am not aware. On my own farm, we got some NRCS cost share to install irrigation, but you could probably stretch it. That'll be something you'll have to ask your USDA service agency director, because they do offer drainage in terms of grass waterways. So that might be something to think about. You may want to apply for some cost share to install a grass waterway close by where you're going to have your bank and your planting of tunnels. And then that'll help facilitate the drainage. But again, that's going to be done in advance. So that might be something. That's a good idea. I've never really thought of that. I already had my grass waterway by my tunnels, so I didn't even think about it. But if you're starting all brand new, yeah, you may want to talk to your USDA Farm Service Agency and see if you can put in maybe if you have room and an elevation to put in a grass waterway close by where you're going to be putting your establishment of tunnels. That's a good idea.
Sabrina, I'm going to hop in real fast and just mention, in case you or Brad have not been able to see it, but there is a question in the Q&A section, which is specific to Brad's topic, which is drainage. And the participant asks basically, how are people handling drainage? And if you'll permit me, Brad, I'd like to give a very brief summary, and you correct me, okay? I think one, it's site selection, like Brad said. Number one is site selection. Number two would be prep that site, crown it like he showed, if possible, so that the floor of the tunnel is higher than all the land that surrounds it. Third, install drainage, tiles, pipe, French drains outside the tunnel, if need be, and if that will be important, and you can. And then finally, if that's not an option, you can create surface drainage flow or modify the surface drainage flow by creating swales, if you will, banks, so water that's flowing toward the tunnel doesn't reach the tunnel. Right? Have I summed up a good approach to?
Yeah, you're right on. This is
drainage
another
flow?
whole topic, but
Yeah.
someday maybe we can talk about how folks might be capturing some of that runoff to actually put into an irrigation holding tank. That's another whole topic in itself. But I'm seeing
Right.
coming through the chat there, several folks have received some NRCS cost share to help with drainage around their tunnel areas. So, yep, that seems like there's some opportunity there.
Yeah, and time wouldn't allow Brad to get into all the details, of course, of how the hows and some of the whys. But as a person who did not follow Brad's advice, I can say with regard to site selection, because it's kind of a difficult thing here at OSU, I can say that there are many whys. And I know that Sally Miller and Francesco Rotundo and Anna Teston are on the line with us, also experts in the areas of disease and pest management. You don't want any part of any water coming into your tunnel from outside the tunnel. I mean, if at all possible. You'd rather have the water that's there be there only because you put it there through irrigation. That's a philosophy, if you will.
I did see where
That's a
Jane
philosophy.
shared an experience. NRCS came out and determined where she was to put her tunnel, and they put it on the lowest part of her property. NRCS folks are great. No, but some are not high tunnel folks. Some are agronomists or some are beef cattle specialists. So always remember, no matter where you are in Ohio or the US, get a hold of your county educator or a horticulture specialist that might work for your extension service. And, they can either do a site visit or a virtual visit. Get a second. You have too much money and time wrapped up in this. Get a second opinion as to where to site that tunnel, since it is the most important part of putting that tunnel up.
All right, thank you, Brad. We're now going to move on to our second presenter for today. Matt Kleinhenz is our second presenter, and he's going to be talking about the early stages of success and challenge you might see. Okay, Matt, it's now your turn.
Okay. I hope everyone can see what I am seeing, which are, my slides. And I'd like to just, again, welcome you to the school and the second day of the school, and call your attention to the fact that registration is still open, and you are encouraged to share news of the school with others if you think it will be valuable to them. They can still register. I'd also like to mention that there have been some people asking about where to get recordings of each session. They will be available at a URL that I'll provide soon. Essentially a YouTube channel, so you'll have an opportunity to listen to and view these recordings going forward. So without further delay, I'm going to take up the topic of early successes and challenges when you're starting your high tunnel production operation. And I'd like to just take a half a step back and remind everyone that's listening and watching that of what you're seeing here on your screen. That specialty crop production settings and systems are very diverse. If you look across the entire US, across the entire world, we have flower, vegetable, fruit, herb operations in rural to urban settings of every scale, small to large. Obviously, some that are managing their operations organically or conventionally. Some are very focused on a single or a small number of crops, where others are growing a far larger number of crops. And some are heavily vested in technology, and others are much less heavily vested in technology. We see this diversity also in where production takes place. under the open sky, such as in the upper left-hand picture here of a lettuce field. Some people are also, of course, under the open sky, but providing temporary cover for their crops, such as with the low tunnels. And then you have the high tunnel situation, which is what we are focusing on today and perhaps for the rest of the school. But it doesn't stop there, of course, because we have also fully climate-controlled greenhouses, which are, of course, steps above the climate control options that are available with a high tunnel. So for some background, a recent survey reminded us of the, if you will, ubiquity, the very common use of semi-protected systems, whether they be greenhouse or high tunnel. Roughly half of the vegetable growers surveyed, who responded to the survey, indicated that they have used or will use some form of protected culture. And of course, not surprisingly, high tunnels being a significant part of that protected culture community. I don't need to tell you, but high tunnels are sprouting up a bit like mushrooms all over the country. Very common, and they're of course increasing in number. And we now have a community of high tunnel users that's been at it for decades, and some who are just starting or just still at the stage of considering it. So we have a lot of diversity in front of us. These tunnel-shaped enclosures that people are using, they're tools of choice for lots of people, as I said. And in the bottom section of this particular frame, you see some of the characteristics of these structures and how they're used, whether they're used by themselves, such as a high tunnel without any low tunnels, or just a low tunnel without a high tunnel. You see that they vary in how much they can be moved, how durable they are, what they're covered with, how much do you need to improve upon the structure after you've actually purchased it to make it functional, the demands that they place on you as the user. All of these tunnel-shaped enclosures come with a different set of opportunities and challenges. And in the next 10 or 12 minutes, I'm going to try to summarize some of the early stage successes and challenges that you or others that are likely to face as they get into high tunnel production. But these are the effects that most low, mid, and high tunnels, that's LMH there, these are the effects that most low, mid, and high tunnels have on the crops beneath them. Of course, they shed snow, rain, and ice, so they're often drier, at least that liquid moisture. They're going to trap heat and increase the temperature. They're going to calm the air as long as they're not open. They're going to create environments that are less favorable to some pests and diseases, but more favorable to others. Those of us here at OSU can recall a colleague who used to direct our IPM program saying that, congratulations, when you install a high tunnel in Ohio, you not only have the pests and diseases of the humid, Midwest Great Lakes region, but you now also have the pests and diseases of the Mediterranean. So yes, you have perhaps limited your exposure to some of the diseases and pests that are common to Ohio, but you've now just introduced an environment that is very favorable for other pests and diseases. So it's a diversifying operation in that stage. So picking up where Brad left off, with selecting a site and installing a high tunnel, if you take the step of driving posts, putting on the ribs, covering the structure with plastic, planting it to your favorite crop, whether it be tomato in the summer, which is very common for people, spinach in the spring and fall or winter, whatever crops you choose to place inside your high tunnel. These are the benefits that perhaps drove you to do all of that. Make more money, adapt to your farm, work, or personal situation, increase the efficiency with which you use your money and your time and your effort, and also possibly, make your operation, the income from your operation and certain practice procedures and timelines more predictable and stable. These are just a sum of the benefits that drive people to high tunnel production relative to that so-called open sky farming without any cover. But these are also some of the well-known repair and maintenance needs of high tunnel production. They're, of course, grouped into the unplanned and planned categories. As Brad mentioned, snow and ice may accumulate. It may need to be removed either from the top of the tunnel or the sides of the tunnel. You, of course, We'll need to troubleshoot irrigation and drainage and the roll-up bars and end walls and so on. And some of them are planned, replacing the baseboards when they eventually give out, replacing hardware, installing bed frames if they're used, so on and so on. There are repair and maintenance needs that come along with the high tunnels because, after all, they are structures. And as I illustrate here, they not only range from being unplanned to planned, but from very cheap to very expensive, ones that you can do by yourself, but ones that require a group, ones that can be done very quickly, but ones compared to ones that are very, very time consuming, and ones that are more or less you can master the first time that you do it, but others require practice. So they are much more difficult at first. These are the expectations that you should have going into the process after your new high tunnel is installed. And they're just illustrated with some of these pictures here. Do we need to remove snow from the sides of the high tunnels? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly we want to monitor the tunnel to prevent it from being damaged. We will have to repair and replace hardware. We will have to patch plastic. The plastic does not last forever, and it will get holes in it. As Brad alluded to, you will need to replace the plastic. I mean, after the first time, when you put it on, it will need to be replaced every 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And that's not a job you can do by yourself. It's just, I hesitate to say what any one person can accomplish, but it's just so rarely done by one person. It's functionally not able to be done by one. And you need the right conditions for that to have, to be able to operate, complete that process as well. So be mindful of that. You'll also, quite frankly, as Brad mentioned, having 5 high tunnels, but having built 8, deal with the situation that you see here. Things happen, and they happen to folks who are doing the right things, but it is a structure. So it will get damaged. Mother Nature is powerful. And so if the high tunnel is not well repaired and maintained all along, and if it's not in the right condition when the storm hits, this is the kind of situation that you can find yourself in. This is the kind of situation you can also find yourself in if the high tunnel is not installed or maintained and managed properly. So be mindful of the fact that all the effort that you have put into starting high tunnel production can be set back or not provide you with a return on investment because the structure could be damaged. This is not a scared straight routine, as Brad and I are known to be able to deliver with regard to starting high tunnels production, but it is, I think, a listing of facts that are appropriate for people perhaps unaware of the risks associated with them to hear. So I'll wrap up with this slide and then move on to the final one by saying that this is just a partial list. What you're seeing here is a partial list of what's necessary to succeed at high tunnel production. You'll need to become more familiar with pests and diseases that you may not have needed to pay a lot of attention to beforehand. You will probably need to alter your nutrient and irrigation programs. After all, you're growing under cover now. The crop is not receiving any rain. It is growing at a different rate. So its nutrient and irrigation needs will change. You will need to alter your soil management or pay very, very close attention to soil management. Recall that you've just now covered that parcel of land. You have a higher expectation for it than a parcel of equal size that's uncovered. And you're committing to that parcel for a long time, for however long that high tunnel is meant to be in operation. So soil management needs to be top notch. You'll be very in tune with the weather, my high tunnel conditions, my crop condition relationship. If you drive around in a car and you do not use the heating and cooling system that comes with the dial, and you can monitor the temperature inside the vehicle only by opening and closing the windows, you now have an appreciation for what it will be like for you to manage the conditions around your crop in a high tunnel at scale. And keep in mind, you're probably not in your car 24/7 like your crops will be. So when it begins to rain, you may need to close the tunnel. When the rain passes by and the sun comes out, you may need to open the tunnel so on and so forth. You'll need to look at different crops and varieties, possibly alter your planting, very likely to alter your planting and harvesting and other schedules. You'll need to become familiar with and optimize your cultural practices. This would be staking, trellising, pruning, plant populations, the processes involved in tending the crop, if you will. And you will make new friends and also accrue new competitors, because after all, one cannot, if you will, jump into the high tunnel community and be unaware that many are there also, and perhaps having similar goals as you. This is a good thing. This is not meant to deter anyone, but this is just I think a business reality that if you think you're going to get to the market first, well, your neighbor with a high tunnel may be trying to do the same thing. And then finally, I'll just say all of these put together mean it's a new set of knowledge that you're needing to develop and will benefit from having. And it just starts at step one, okay? And so the knowledge that you need is born out of the reality that high tunnel production is different from all three of the other types that you see here. Open sky and never covered, open sky but covered temporarily, and on the other side, greenhouse. All of them have different production conditions and scenarios, and the high tunnel ones are unique. So if you come from one of those areas of experience, that is excellent. You will want to apply that experience to the high tunnel situation, but recognize that it will need to be adapted. It will need to be customized, if you will, to the high tunnel site. So in summary, I'll just make my point with this little graphic. It's a learning curve. It has peaks and valleys. You will rise quickly looking like fun. I run into some problems. This becomes hard. I feel like I'm 5 years in and I still don't know what I'm doing. Oh, now I get it. Maybe I don't. Brad is one of our resident experts for sure with high tunnel production within OSU. You heard him say that he installed high tunnels in 1996. I'm a relative newcomer, not installing the first ones that I've used since until 2003. And I have gone, and I'm still going through this rise and fall of the learning curve with regard to high tunnel production. I feel like I get over the hump on some areas, and then I find new things, new ways I've messed up and that I have to get back to speed on. So you may experience the same bumpy ride, but as you do so, remember, you are not alone. You have other growers and you have other trusted people you trust to contact for input, advice, and maybe just somebody to quote unquote vent to as you figure things out. And then secondly, a lot of that input can be obtained, I'll say, relatively inexpensively. You attend schools like this one, conferences and workshops and trainings and field days when we can finally get back together in person. And of course, as some people have asked already in today's chat, there are some marvelous, absolutely marvelous resources available for you to read and to watch and listen to, as well as you reach your newest, if you will, blip in your own learning curve. So I appreciate your attention here. I'll be glad to address any questions if there are any. I'll take myself off of this big screen where I can't see anybody and we can go forward from there before wrapping up.
Brad has answered a lot of the questions, but one popped up that he hasn't answered yet. So the best perennial low growing cover crop for between rows for year round coverage. That might be you and Brad.
Sure. And others on the line if they'd like to chime in. I think that's a big, it's a big question, difficult from my point of view, difficult to answer with one single crop. I would say the following. For those of us in the Midwest area, there is a Midwest Cover Crops Council, and they have put out a number of excellent resources. It's based out of Michigan State University, but it's a consortium. They have offered some great resources. You may also be aware of the book put out by SARE, the Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program, SARE.org. They have a book called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. That would be an excellent place to start also. I will say that if there's a permanent cover, a person desires a permanent cover between the rows, that's a high goal to achieve. I'd like to follow up with them in time to see how it's going, in part because I know other people have tried it, have found it very difficult because of the amount of foot and equipment traffic in a high tunnel can make it very difficult to establish and maintain a crop there. And then they also wonder about it harboring pests or being an alternative host for diseases. So those are just some of the pros and cons and the challenges associated with a permanent cover.
I personally haven't ever grown any permanent covers, and I don't know if any of my farmers that do, because we never want it to be that wet between the rows to water a cover crop.
Right.
But if you're taking covers off and so forth, maybe that works. But most of my folks grow tomatoes, so it's bone dry in between those rows, and they do use double drip tape on the rows. But that'd be my concern. How are you going to keep that cover crop watered in between those rows? If you can do it, that'd be great again, but might get some mice and voles like to harbor down in that too.
We have a video on our YouTube channel of ants carrying away our lettuce seed at night. I'm not kidding you. Thanks to our excellent entomologists, they pointed us in the right direction, and we set up video cameras, and sure enough, the ants came marching in the middle of the night, only to carry away our newly seeded lettuce. I'm not against ants in any way. I am saying that, seconding what Brad said, is that there's a balance between introducing, that approach of a cover crop, but also, dealing with the potential unwanted consequences.
Okay.
There was a couple questions have come about insurance. And again, just talk to your agent, but 25 years ago, before tunnels became tunnels, I actually, on my own farm, had purchased insurance. So the one that got blown down from the tornadic winds, I was able to get the money back from that insurance policy 25 years ago. But today, because of the temporary structure, because they're ground posts just driven in the ground, there's no concrete foundation, they're considered temporary. I do not know of anybody today. None of my farmers are able to get insurance anymore. I haven't been able to get insurance anymore. Probably in the last 20 years, I haven't been able to get insurance. So don't get your hopes up. I had a farmer down in Adams County just lost all of his poly on a 220-foot long structure during a windstorm here a couple weeks ago. His insurance came out and nope, it's not covered. So just check with your agent, but don't be too surprised you won't get any. He had them concreted and it still blew it away. So I'm on a ridge here with the highest winds in Clinton County, and we have to concrete every other post in. But yeah, I guess it just varies on your site. My first tunnel, the one that got sucked up out of the ground by the tornadic winds, had no concrete. So after that happened, we do concrete every other post in. But yeah, it just depends on your site. But especially if you're in a low wind area, I think that'd be good. But yeah, the one guy up in Lake County, he's not putting those type of structures up anymore.
Okay, so Brad, do you use shade cloth on your tunnels when planting tomatoes in them?
We do not use the shade cloth at planting, but as a extension agent, Memorial Day weekend, I am like Paul Revere running around to all the farmers, reminding them to pull their shade cloth, because down in Southern Ohio here, our tomatoes are either starting to be picked or are very large, and they're really hanging out there in the canopy. They've been exposed, and that's always the hottest weekend historically for us. And if folks don't get a shade on there, a 10-15% shade cloth or whitewash, some folks are using, water mixed with lime and put a little tablespoon of salt in it, just throw it up over top of the tunnel, and then it falls down. And that's the same whitewash you use in a dairy parlor, or at least you used to use in dairy parlors. That is enough to usually reduce the sun scald issues on the fruit that we get. But now, like Matt says, you get north of 70, shading is not as common up there. So it depends on.
Yeah, the shading question keeps coming back, which, it's understandable. It's been with us for a long time. And to be quite, I think what Brad has said is spot on. I would just add that I think that arguably the question is still a little bit unresolved, unanswered, in part because, we're shading mainly to reduce temperature. And at least in some circumstances, that's going to be a consequence of shading, right? So you're reducing not only the light, but also possibly the temperature. And we simply want to be, in my mind, we want to be able to do that selectively, appropriately throughout the entire cropping cycle. So Brad was saying on Memorial Day, he's running around reminding people to put it on. When do they take it off?
By the first snow, because it holds the snow in place. So if you forget to take off your shade cloth, which I do that right around November 1st, I'm driving around the countryside. The guy still has his shade cloth on. I remind him to take it off because there's a snow event coming in.
But if you were to, and I know we're running close to time here, but folks, if you were not taking the tomatoes that long, and instead you were going to start
crop
at your winter,
double crop.
Exactly, winter to spring harvest of, cash crops, or establishing a cover crop, you may not want shade anymore. As a matter of fact, you might be looking very carefully at the sunlight and every other pattern, and you might be thinking about taking that shade off in August. Or
Labor Day,
right. Labor Day. So again, that's why I just say it's a question about not only when to start, but also when to stop. It's very much like irrigation in that way. Mentioned before we wrap up, just before Sabrina gives us the sign off here, that number one, all the registrants will receive an email with a copy of the slides that were shown here in PDF form and a link to where they can view the session online at the YouTube channel. So that's one. So look for that by email. Secondly, questions that were not answered today are being cataloged. They're being stashed, if you will. There will be a response to as many of them as we can get to, whether as a web page addressing some FAQs from the school, or direct emails to the registrants, if you will. We're exploring different options for getting you the information that the input that you have requested. So bear that in mind going forward. I'd also like to say that while the sessions are recorded, and of course it gives people a chance to see them for the first time that way if they need to, you see here, folks, that your being present can help steer the conversation and give yourself, if you will, a placeholder, a foot in the door, so to speak, on what information is shared and what kind of content is planned for next time. So it's still, I think, important to participate live if you can. So Sabrina, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up. Let me, if it's okay, I'll share my screen briefly while she goes through that, and I will pull up the goodbye slide, if you will.
Thank you all for good discussion today. As we wrap up, we want to thank Matt and Brad for their presentations and sharing their expertise. Thank you all for joining us today for this presentation. We hope you enjoyed your time. This has been the second of 6 scheduled sessions of the school, so please join us for sessions and look for follow-up communication by email, including messages containing information on where you can learn more and shared in responses to questions and comments that were shared. Again, thank you for participating in the OSU Specialty Crops team in Ohio Controlled Environment Agriculture Center Virtual High Tunnel School. Good luck with your projects and stay in touch with us.